Thank you. Thank you very much for coming. It's quite a regular thing that I come to Washington, D.C. I think it's my third visit in the last 8-9 months for regular contacts, both with the administration and with Congress, on a series of issues we have in common and exchange of views on the main priorities of the time. Beyond this, obviously, we have regular contacts in Europe, in Brussels, elsewhere, wherever we have the chance to meet. This visit gave me the opportunity to discuss mainly with friends and colleagues in Congress, both in the Senate and in the House, about the main security challenges we're facing today. First of all, the work we're doing to strengthen the European Union defense in strong coordination with NATO. I will be at the NATO Defense Ministerial meeting tomorrow night in Brussels. We are developing fast a deep coordination and cooperation within the European Union member states on defense and security, and we're doing that strengthening as ever before our cooperation with NATO, especially on cyber and hybrid threats, but also maritime security and other issues. So I took the opportunity to debrief our friends in Congress about this process, especially those that are working on security issues. We are also facing threats and challenges in our region. Obviously, the situation in the Middle East, the crisis ongoing in Syria, the work we are planning to do with an upcoming conference in Brussels, the second of its type, that we will host in spring to accompany the work on the areas of reduction of conflict. And obviously, we discussed also related issues in the region. No secret that on the Iran nuclear deal, we had exchanges in the recent weeks, and obviously that was also part of my discussions with the colleagues in Congress, with full respect of the national domestic side of the debate here in the United States. But also we thought it was important to, first of all, explain and represent to our American friends the clear European position on the fact that the nuclear deal with Iran is delivering and working. I know that Director General of the IAEA, Amano, is in town in these very same hours. We had a meeting yesterday here in these premises. We trust the IAEA and its 8 reports on the fact that Iran is fully compliant with its nuclear commitments. And we have, as Europeans, a clear top priority strategic interest that is linked to our security, to keep the full implementation of the deal in place from all sides. And we discussed, obviously, the way ahead. I heard from colleagues in Congress their views and their state of play of their work after the presentation by the President of the new American policy on Iran. As you have seen, the European Union is completely united in supporting the deal and its full implementation. And both at the level of foreign ministers and heads of state and government, we used very clear expressions and words. And again, we wish to see the United States continuing its implementation of the deal in the future, and we're ready to work with them in this regard. We also discussed other pressing issues we work on together in these months. First of all, always nuclear-related, the situation in the DPRK, especially in a time when President Trump is visiting the region. I've had the chance to discuss the ways in which the European Union can support the diplomatic efforts. The European Union has increased its sanctions on DPRK. We are now the ones that have the toughest sanction regime on DPRK in the world. And DPRK is the country in the world against which we have the toughest sanction regime. We believe that pressure has to be at its maximum, both economically and diplomatically, and we're doing our part on this in coordination with the United States. We also believe that sanctions are a way to push for opening a political space for negotiations, a political space that so far we have not seen, but we hope to see it as a result of a coordinated, united pressure from the international community. And we appreciated the United States approach on DPRK, especially when it worked on the UN Security Council resolution last September. So we're coordinating policies also on this. And last but not least, common interest we have on working on security, but also on development and the management of migratory flows in Africa. The European Union has increased its work in Africa with partnerships all over the continent. We see an interest, and I've seen this also today in Congress, to work more and more together, especially on the security angle, counterterrorism, control of the territory. I noticed with satisfaction that the United States announced last week, if I'm not wrong, in New York, in the Security Council, a contribution of $60 million for the military joint force of the G5 Sahel, which is following a 50 million euros contribution the European Union made during the summer. So we welcome this. And also this is a field where we will work together more and more. We will host in Brussels in December an international conference to coordinate the international support to the countries in the Sahel to manage better their security challenges, and especially the organized crime and the trafficking in the area. So a wide range of issues, and I'm sure I'm not covering some of them, but I count on your questions to complement the picture. So a lot on Iran, but not only.
We have Matt Lee from AP down there.
Hi. Can you, as you understand it from your discussions with people on the Hill, does the Corker-Cotton legislation on Dinara violate the JCPOA in and of itself?
Have you seen a draft?
Yes.
Oh, good. I haven't.
You have.
No. I made it clear, and it's very important for me to clarify this. U.S. legislation is a matter for U.S. legislative bodies. The European Union does not interfere in national decision-making or policy-making. And I come to your question. So what I discussed with people on the Hill is the need for us to have the United States compliant with the deal. And I got reassurances from their sides, different sides on the Hill, that this is exactly the spirit in which they're working to keep the United States compliant with the deal. And this is also our interest, to support a solution that can keep the United States compliant with the deal. This is our interest. Then the way in which the legislators on the Hill will do that, it's an internal process in the United States. We're not going to interfere in political processes of the United States. We're very respectful, as we expect our American friends never to interfere in domestic decision-making processes in Europe. But obviously, we are ready to discuss, and we started a bit to discuss the contents that would mean a compliance or not to the deal.
I'm not asking you to interfere. I just want to know, because supporters of the agreement in this country and elsewhere, some of them, many of them, believe that the legislation, if it is passed and signed into law, is in itself a violation of the deal. The EU can't not take a position on that. I'm sorry, it's not interference to say whether you think it would be a violation or not.
What I can tell you is this: we are exchanging views with the legislators on the need to make sure, before a bill is presented, that its content does not represent a violation of the agreement. This is something I can tell you as the High Representative of the European Union, so bring in here the position of the 28 member states of the European Union, that, as I told you, have a clear security interest in keeping the deal working. And also as the coordinator of the Joint Commission that supervises the implementation and the monitoring of the implementation of the deal. I made clear any outcome of any process that is an internal process, and as such has to be respected, has to be, at the end of the day, compliant with the deal, and the Joint Commission that I chair will, at the end of the day, monitor that.
Yeah, right here.
Andreas Ross with Punk Battalion Minded Zeitung. So to be more specific, an American law be compliant with the JCPOA if it states that after the expiration of certain deadlines, automatic sanctions are imposed on Iran if it does things after those deadlines that it's not supposed to do until these deadlines? Would that be a violation of the deal?
I would not speculate on possibilities as they are discussed. I'm sorry about that. I know it's a delicate moment, especially for a press conference like this. You would understand that. Work is ongoing. What I can say is that I made clear the European positions. I made clear the framework of the agreement. And I got clear indications that the intention is to keep the United States compliant with the agreement and find ways to do that in coordination with the E3, the European Union as such, that goes beyond the E3, and the rest of the international community, which is a starting point for common work on the way ahead, I would say. I cannot share more details at this stage as work is ongoing in Congress, and I have to be respectful of these political procedures here.
So did any of the persons on the Hill that you talked to ask you in any way to help them find a solution that might accommodate the concerns of the administration but could still be going with you? Did you hear creative ideas?
Well, we moved from a situation a couple of years ago where the European Union was perceived as somehow and sometimes not relevant to a situation where you would expect the European Union to mediate between the White House and Congress. That's a bit too much. That's not the way in which we work. But we expressed readiness and willingness to accompany the legislators here, as we would do with any other country, party of the agreement, to find solutions that are compatible with the compliance of the agreement, yes.
Thank you very much for doing this. Tatiana Komokova with News Agency. Recently, the Department of State released public guidance on the implementation of the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. And this is related to Russia. And they said that they have done extensive outreach to allies in Europe. And we know that there are some very big projects that involve European Union and Russia, specifically Nord Stream 2. And did you get any clarifications from the American side how that will work? And do you have any concerns to get sanctions having this project with Russia?
This is not an issue we discussed during this visit I paid to DC, but this is an issue on which contacts in the last months have been very intense and will continue to be very intense. For us, there are two key elements here. One is that we want and we need full coordination with our American friends on the sanction system we put in place on Russia. The second point is that we want to have full, let's say, consideration of European concerns when it comes to the implementation of the bill. And we are now entering this phase. So work is constant, not at my level, mainly at the ambassador level and working level here. We've been working on this all over the last months, and we will continue to do so. The letter of the bill is, let's say, broad enough to allow different ways to interpret and implement the law. And for us, what will count will be the implementation of the law that would not affect European interests, keeping a good coordination across the Atlantic on the sanction regime we put in place on Russia.
We have a question right here.
Is the European Union looking into ways to insulate European businesses from secondary sanctions if the U.S. is to withdraw from the nuclear deal?
We have made it clear that the European Union and its member states will protect European interests. I would like to make it clear European interests in this field are first and foremost security interests. We believe that the full implementation of the nuclear deal with Iran is a considerable part of the security architecture of our region. And so we have an interest, a security interest, to keep it working. But obviously, the European Union and its member states are also always ready to protect European economic interests. But let me tell you, I have the impression that here in the United States, sometimes there's an overestimation of the economic relations that the European Union has with Iran. We have increased enormously our trade and relations and our investments with Iran, which is and was supposed to be part of the consequences of the implementation of the agreement. Let's remember that Iran has been compliant with its nuclear commitments. We have a commitment to reciprocate somehow with different measures, like the lifting of the nuclear-related sanctions, which we have done, but also with economic relations that have grown in quantity and quality. But exports from the European Union to Iran, just to mention one number, amount to 0.4% of the total exports of the European Union in the world, which means that they're not so relevant for the European economy. But the European Union and its member states are always determined and ready to protect European interests, being them security interests, economic interests worldwide.
Did you discuss what's going on in Saudi Arabia and with its neighbors, and what is your view on this, and would the EU share the full support shown by President Trump to Saudi Arabia a couple of hours ago?
You refer to the Lebanese developments, or do you refer to the Gulf developments? Oh, we have several files open. We discussed it partially. I have to say the main focus of our discussions when it comes to the region were related to the nuclear issues that I want to stress are separate from the regional issues that are going on. We definitely believe that working more and more to a different kind of regional setup would increase security, stability, and peace, and also economical possibilities for the countries in the region. So we definitely share the view that there is some more work to be done in the region. We always believe that the regional approach is the right one. As you know, the nuclear agreement doesn't cover that part. That was the decision taken at the beginning of the negotiations back 12 years ago, not by us. And that is the framework we're dealing with. When it comes to regional developments, I have to say one of the main concerns I have in this moment is the situation in Lebanon. And I hope that things can be clarified soon, and that the country can work on its unity and the possibility of having institutions that work properly at the benefit of the Lebanese people.
And do you support the last moves by Riyadh? What is your view on what's going on inside Saudi Arabia with its neighbors?
Well, any move that goes into diversification of economy, modernization of the system, and anti-corruption is obviously to be welcomed. I discussed several times during my visits to Riyadh and Jeddah the needs and the perspectives that the authorities of the country have put in place to diversify the economy. I think this is a smart move, and that obviously has an impact also in the way in which the country and the society works. So full support to the agenda of economic reforms of the leadership. On regional issues, I go back to what I said before. We see the increase of tensions in the region only as an additional proof of the fact that there needs to be a different kind of approach in the region that invests more on cooperation and less in confrontation. And that's the European experience. Let's not forget, European countries used to be as conflictual, if not more conflictual, than the Gulf countries were and are. And now we are a political union, economic union. We have the same currency. We travel around with the same passports, actually without showing the passports. So there's always hope that a more cooperative regional order can be worked on. We believe that would be beneficial for all in terms of security, in terms of economy, and also in terms of stability of other regions that are connected. Every time that the Gulf is in turmoil, repercussions are felt across the Gulf, in the Horn of Africa, even in the Sahel, in Southeast Asia, not to mention the wider Middle East, not to mention Europe, we are neighbors. So we have always believed in trying to offer and build and invest in dialogue, cooperation, and especially when it comes to tensions across the Gulf, we've always advocated, that's not a mystery, for a political resolution based on dialogue, especially between Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain and Egypt on one side and Qatar on the other side. For us, anti-terrorism is a very serious thing that strikes Europe as much as it strikes other places in the region and in the world. We believe this needs to be tackled in a unified and cooperative manner across the region without excluding any actor from the efforts that need to be put in place.
We have Michelle from NPR all the way in the back.
I'll keep my voice up. As you know, the Iranians are holding several American prisoners. They're also holding several European officials. Do you get the sense that Iran is looking for some kind of trade? Do you think the U.S. is open to that? And are the Europeans willing to be kind of a conduit for that kind of negotiation?
I will not comment on the American citizens. I can say that for what concerns European citizens, and in particular European Union citizens, we've always raised this issue whenever we have contacts with our Iranian counterparts, which is quite often at different levels. I have also to say, in general terms, our work with Iran on human rights has progressed over the last years. With the human rights dialogue that we've started with them. And we do protect and work on the protection of European citizens, not only in Iran, but also elsewhere in the world. This is mainly and primarily a responsibility of the countries of nationality of the citizens. Consular responsibility is still in the hands of European Union member states, but the European Union is always there to support and convey a message of unity.
Ashat from Reuters.
To go back to Saudi Arabia and the human rights situation there, should the government of Saudi Arabia be arresting citizens or subjects of the kingdom without immediately providing evidence for allegations that they have made without charting a path for due process? Is this something that you think Saudi Arabia should be doing? And secondly, does the increasing concentration of power in Saudi Arabia under the Crown Prince add to or subtract from the stability of Saudi Arabia from your point of view?
I will not comment on that. Also, to keep the argument linked to my visit, which is to DC and not to Riyadh.
You don't want to comment on the human rights issues?
You know very well, the European Union is probably one of the very few actors in the world, if not the only one, but I never have to say the only one because then our Canadian friends get angry, rightly so, that keeps human rights at the center of their foreign policy. Here I know the thinking has gone in a different direction. For us, work on human rights, and I will stress, rule of law and democracy keeps a central role in all our foreign policy work. This is true when it comes to the Gulf, this is true when it comes to Saudi Arabia, this is true when it comes to our internal work. We still have also on the European Union soil work to do. We know very well human rights issues are constantly work in process in the region and elsewhere. So obviously this is and continues to be part of our top priorities when we deal also with Saudi Arabia. That's not a mystery.
One, on the JCPOA, what Senator Corker was talking about originally was basically eliminating the sunset clauses and essentially renegotiating unilaterally the extension of the JCPOA by the U.S. Congress. I assume that's something, if you could just speak in general terms about that, whether you see that being resolved, and how confident are you that they will come up with legislation that doesn't violate the JCPOA? And thirdly, will you continue this discussion between the European Union and the members of the Hill staff as this piece of legislation goes forward?
First of all, thank you very much for the question, because it allows me to clarify a couple of things in general terms, as you said, but general terms are the basis for then concrete and practical decisions to be taken. First of all, the JCPOA has no sunset clause. As director of the IAEA, Amano puts it, the sun doesn't set when it comes to nuclear commitments. There are different provisions in the JCPOA that have different durations. Some of them have a certain time scope, others have a different time scope, others are forever. Article 3 of the agreement says that Iran would never develop a nuclear weapon, for instance. And with the ratification, with the foreseen ratification of the additional protocol by Iran, certain commitments, nuclear-related commitments, that have to do, for instance, with the work of the IAEA, will become permanent. And this is part of the agreement. So we do not see, not only in the European Union, but here I'm talking also about the international community perception of the agreement, we do not see the agreement as having a sunset clause. The agreement is composed of different provisions. Some of them have different durations, but the commitments not to develop nuclear weapons are forever. Second, renegotiating is not an option. You could not imagine, out of pragmatism, realism, it's not being naive, on the contrary, it's being very concrete and pragmatic. You could not imagine 12 years of complex nuclear-related negotiations, some of them extremely complicated and complex, also from a technical point of view, not to mention the political point of view, that produced 104 pages that most of us in this room would have difficulties in, let's say, decrypting in some parts, even if we have all developed a certain knowledge and skill when it comes to centrifuges and heavy water and things like that. But 12 years of negotiations of an international multilateral process resulting in 104 pages of extremely detailed provisions that were not based on confidence and trust, but on commitments, verifiable commitments, and an intrusive monitoring system. Anybody understands very well cannot be reopened in one line or one paragraph or one chapter. If you reopen one part of it, the entire agreement is reopened, and you will probably enter into another 12 years of negotiations, provided that you will find the political will and the trust to reopen negotiations. I have to tell this very clearly for Europeans as well as for the others that are sitting in the Joint Commission that is monitoring the JCPOA implementation, meaning the three, Russia, China, renegotiating part of the agreement or the agreement is not an option. I think I was clear. And yes, contacts will continue to go on. As I said, with a very clear distinction, we do not want to interfere in any possible way with the political debate in the United States. This is up to Congress, this is up to the White House, this is up to political forces here. We have enough of politics in Europe to deal with our own ones. It's not for us to enter into these debates. This is for our American friends to deal with that. We stay out of this, but if there is a way in which we can accompany this internal debate, providing advice on what would be compliant or not when it comes to the implementation of the JCPOA, we're ready to do it and happy to do it, because our main interest is to guarantee the full implementation of the agreement by all.
And how confident are you that they will come up with?
I'm always confident.
We have time for just a couple more. Kylie from CBS.
One specific question. I'm wondering if maintaining a one-year breakout period for Iran to develop a nuclear weapon is in violation of the deal, because that's something that's been floated by Congress. And second, Iran said that they turned down a meeting between President Rouhani and President Trump during UNGA. I'm wondering your reaction to that, if you would, be a proponent proponent of high-level meetings like that, or the U.S. floating them? What do you think?
You will forgive me, but I would not comment on neither of the two.
Thank you so much, Katrina Manson from Financial Times. If I can just bring you back to Saudi Arabia and Iran, what do you make of Saudi's claim that Iran has committed an act of war against it by, it alleges, equipping Yemenis with missiles and launching a missile? And how do you see the fragility of relations between Saudi and Iran at the moment and assess their direction?
Fragility is a very diplomatic term. Congratulations. You should change job. When I was referring to the fact that in Europe we lived centuries, if not thousands of years of wars, and we still managed to come out of that with a political union and economic union, I am serious, meaning that we see the need, especially when tensions go high, as it is the case in the Gulf and around the Gulf, to have rationality prevail on all sides and wonder what would be the best interests of our populations, in this case other populations, but also our own, on the way ahead. We are not happy with some of the behaviors we see in the region, coming from all parts. We will always encourage, dialogue, openness, a regional cooperation, and work to diminish tensions and contain tensions. Again, I know this can sound a rosy picture. If you look at European history, and the European history is closest to the Gulf than you can imagine, or to the Middle East that you can imagine. We have historic links that relate to the Middle East that goes back to millenniums. It was exactly in the times of highest threats and dangers, including during the Cold War, that we managed to put in place some elements of a security architecture that was preserving the worst option to happen. So it's not out of naivete. It's on the contrary, out of realism that you say, and we say, there are many behaviors we don't like, across the region. And we make it clear bilaterally and publicly every time we can, and we even take actions and sometimes sanctions on this. But for us, what is essential is that at a certain moment, the actors involved take a deep breath, realize what the interests of the people are, and see if it is not possible to find some minimum common ground of understanding or of cooperation or of deconflicting. You can have different shades that avoid escalations that can be very dangerous. We would always be ready to support, encourage any of these steps that can take different forms. It's exactly when tensions go higher that we see the need for opening spaces for dialogue and cooperation. I know this is not the wind that is blowing as the majority voice in the world of today, but allow me to bring a little bit of wisdom as the European voice in a world that seems to go completely crazy here. It's dangerous. We need to calm down the situation. We need to bring down the temperature a bit rather than increasing the level of confrontation. The level of confrontation across the region can have extremely dangerous repercussions, not only in the region, but also elsewhere. We believe that lowering these tensions is possible and is in the interest of all the actors in different ways, at different levels, with different steps. We think it would be wise.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. See you next time.